Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So, this is a video that I've wanted to make for a very long time, and I'll explain why I haven't made the video soon enough. So, as you guys know, this past weekend we had a card in Saudi Arabia, a pretty big card, the 5 versus 5. I've had a chance to go back and watch the most significant fights, the ones that I missed. And a couple of things from that card really intrigued me. The one that intrigued me the most, strangely enough, was the Willie Hutchinson Craig Richards fight. And I might talk about that fight in my next live stream. I don't really want to spend too much time on that here. What I wanted to talk about here was the other fight that really intrigued me from the card, and that was Dmitry Bivol's fight. Now, as I'm sure most of you are aware, Dmitry Bivol was supposed to be fighting Beterbiev in one of the biggest fights in boxing for the undisputed light heavyweight title, with all the marbles on the line. And yeah, that was supposed to happen. It's a fight boxing fans have wanted to see for a few years now. And yeah, Beterbiev, as he has so often in his career, he ended up getting injured and pulling out of the fight. And it's just one of them things, you know. Beterbiev's career has been plagued with injuries. This guy's had long layoffs, long spells of inactivity in his career, and the vast majority of it has been to do with injuries. I think the guy has like knee problems, and I think he's had them for years. But I digress. Let's talk about the fight. So Dmitry Bivol took on a guy. I forget the guy's name. It was Malik something. The guy was basically a late replacement from Libya, I believe, an undefeated guy, but one who hadn't really fought anybody, but one who was big for the weight, one who came in with a lot of confidence and came to win, like genuinely came to give Dmitry Bivol a fight and, you know, try to use his height and reach, try to box behind a jab, let his right hand go when he needed to. He was a bit cocky and a bit acted like a bit of a thug here and there, but I think he was trying to play mind games to try and get Bivol to be more aggressive, and that actually worked against him because he ended up getting a hiding. So, yeah. But what intrigued me about the fight was it kind of reminded me of something that I had on my mind a long time ago about Dmitry Bivol. And it reminded me of kind of my thought process behind what I was going to say in my prediction video that I never made for him versus Beterbiev. So, basically, the reason why I never made a breakdown for Bivol-Beterbiev and I never made a prediction for the fight when it got signed is because, for one, I half expected it not to happen, but secondly, and this is probably the main reason, going back a few years now, even though I always favoured Artur Beterbiev to beat Dmitry Bivol, I always thought he would be too strong for him, I always thought he would be too technically sound for him, and yeah, I always favoured Beterbiev. But the thing is, I always had in the back of my mind this nagging thought about Beterbiev's age, and I've alluded to this on several live streams, that basically my thought process behind it was, although I expect Beterbiev to win, and if I was to do a technical breakdown of the fight, I would definitely favour Beterbiev to win the fight convincingly, conclusively, and probably even stop Bivol. But the problem is, I kept thinking that by the time that the fight happened, Bivol would be seasoned enough from all the 12-round fights that he's had, and Beterbiev would be old enough to the point where Bivol would have enough at that point in their careers to pull off the upset and beat Beterbiev. I kind of always had that in the back of my mind. So, yeah, Beterbiev's age, his injuries, and his spells of inactivity were constantly nagging away at my mind whenever I thought about that fight. So that's part of the reason why I never did a breakdown for it. But after looking at Dmitry Bivol's last fight, and of course, looking back retrospectively at Beterbiev's most recent fights, I have to say that if that fight happens this year, and if it's all above board, and if Artur Beterbiev is recovered, replenished, and is the same Artur Beterbiev that we saw in the last fight, I honestly don't think Dmitry Bivol has much of a chance of not only winning the fight, but even making the fight competitive. And I'll explain why. So, look, one of the things that fascinates me about Artur Beterbiev from watching this guy fight, not even just his boxing skills or his ability or his power or his strength or anything like that. It's just that I mean, it involves all that stuff, but it's a bit deeper than that. What impresses me about Beterbiev is that the guy is literally a freak. He is a genetic freak. He's the type of person who, I know this is an old cliche, but whatever sport he competed in, he would be world class. And the reason for it is, if you look at how this guy fights, he can step in the ring against a top 10 world ranked light heavyweight, a guy who's taller than him, a guy who's got knockout power in both hands, a guy who's proven at world level and is relatively seasoned and experienced and knows their way around a ring. And he can just jump in the ring with these guys in the first round. He can walk straight at these guys. He can cut off the ring immediately without even thinking about it, without even having to probe or touch him with a jab or anything. There's nothing robotic about this guy. There's nothing programmed about this guy, because that's what the commentators were talking about with Bivol. They were saying he was somewhat robotic and doesn't show much emotion and stuff. But Beterbiev, like I said, he just goes straight at these guys without even thinking about it. He has the confidence in his own physical and technical abilities. He's able to cut off their escape immediately. So these opponents, either they stand their ground and start swinging for the fences and get knocked out inside of 2 rounds, which is what happened to Joe Smith Jr. I'm sure some of you remember. Or these guys end up in pure survival mode from the very opening bell of the fight. Callum Smith, a world-class boxer, a guy with great long-range boxing ability, a really good jab, great straight right hand, a concussive left hook that he can throw to the head or the body, a guy who has bags of experience, former world champion, a guy who has a great high guard and great boxing fundamentals. From the opening round of that fight, Beterbiev gets foot position on him, backs him up to the ropes, and starts putting a beating on him and has him in pure survival mode. If he tried to fight Beterbiev, if he tried to wrestle with Beterbiev, he'd have got taken out in the first round. That was the difference between the two guys. It's just because Callum Smith is such a great survivor and has great boxing fundamentals that he was able to make it 7 rounds, but he had barely any success at all. If any success in the entire fight, he never landed a significant punch, couldn't control the pace of the fight, nothing. And I talked in a recent video about how when Josh Taylor fought Jack Catterall in the rematch, Josh Taylor was able to cut off the ring on Jack Catterall all night, and he was able to trap him on the ropes. And what was impressive about that to me was that Catterall is a habitual mover. This guy just moves laterally constantly in fights, and he's very, very difficult to read and very, very difficult to trap. And Taylor was able to do it, and he was able to gas him out quite quickly. But the problem is, and what cost Taylor the fight, was the fact that he didn't really have the energy to execute the next part of the game plan. He couldn't bend at the knees, get inside, and throw hooks and uppercuts and pivot like he used to. He just doesn't have the strength or the energy to do it. And I think a lot of that is due to the weight cut and all the stress he's put his body under with his, extracurricular activities and whatnot, and just not living the life. Now, Artur Beterbiev, he doesn't even need to do the things that Josh Taylor does. He doesn't need to pivot. He doesn't need to get under punches. He doesn't need to do any of that, because in addition to having even better footwork and being able to get even better position on his opponents, Artur Beterbiev can just stand on the inside with his opponents, and he can just hit them with short, cuffing punches from both hands. And they're the kind of punches where they don't look like there's anything on them. They don't look like he's putting much effort into them. But he's so genetically gifted that every single punch he lands, whether he puts much effort into it or not, just hurts the opponent. And not only hurts them, but drains them of their energy. He drains them immediately. You see these guys, as soon as they get hit, they start backpedaling, they start moving excessively, they go up on the ropes, they shell up, or they try to clinch. And when they try to clinch Beterbiev, they find out that his genetic gifts go beyond just being able to punch and just being so quick and so coordinated. His hand-eye coordination and his foot-eye coordination, if that's even a term, is so good. This guy's always on balance, and when he stands on the inside, He's always got his feet planted to generate full power on his punches. And like I said, whenever he lands anything, he just shakes these guys to their boots and it drains the life out of them, kind of like Joe Joyce when he fought what's his name, Joseph Parker. He was able to drain the life out of Joseph Parker with those short cuffing punches. And it's the same with Beterbiev, but on an even higher level. And like I said, his genetic gifts are so amazing that when these guys try to clinch with him, he's so physically strong that he can just ragdoll these guys, even bigger guys, guys who are taller, longer, rangier, and guys who, generally struggle to make the weight. Beterbiev's able to just ragdoll these guys around the ring, and he's so physically strong that it's incredible. I honestly don't think I've ever seen a light heavyweight fighter who was as strong as him, who had the kind of boxing IQ that he does, and the genetic makeup that he has. So Artur Beterbiev is the kind of guy who, if you're going to beat him, you have to take the initiative. You have to be willing to stand your ground. You look at the guys who have had somewhat of success against Beterbiev. No one's really had much success against him. He has been down a couple of times, however. And the guys who were able to drop him or hurt him were guys who, like I said, they stood their ground. When Anthony Yard fought him, I know Anthony Yard got battered and, in my opinion, lost every single round. But Yard had his best success in that fight when he would stand at the pocket, bend at the waist, and come up with hooks and uppercuts and actually try and fight with Beterbiev, and take advantage of Beterbiev's sometimes overconfidence, if you know what I mean. Yard had the power and the strength to do that for a couple of rounds, but unfortunately for him, Beterbiev was just too persistent, and he kept chopping away with those short, cuffing punches. And what you saw in that fight too, and this is another reason why I've always favoured him to beat Bivol if the fight's on the up, is because when he needed to, I'm talking about Beterbiev here, when he needed to, he could just take a backward step and box behind a jab, and he has one of the most accurate and concussive jabs in the light heavyweight division. He was jabbing Anthony Yard's head off in that fight. And even in the Callum Smith fight, he was able to use his jab and his lead hand control to open up Callum Smith's guard to land hooks and uppercuts and through and round the guard. And I just thought that Beterbiev, to me, like he might actually be the most genetically gifted fighter that I've ever seen. And he might just be the most well-rounded fighter I've ever seen. Because generally, when you get a guy who's a big puncher, who plants his feet to land concussive punches, he usually sacrifices speed, usually sacrifices mobility. But Artur Beterbiev's foot speed is incredible, particularly for a guy who's pushing 40 and a light heavyweight. He moves around that ring like a gazelle. He's got the kind of foot speed of a lightweight. And like I said, he's able to just, again, the guy's so confident and he's so genetically gifted that he can just walk forward on a world-class light heavyweight and either take them out early, or the guy decides to run and survive and he just breaks them down and stops them in the mid to late rounds. So you compare that to a guy like Dmitry Bivol, and I think we saw this from Bivol's last few fights, right? Bivol has some of the same attributes. He has great footwork, great lateral movement. He's got a great active high guard. He's a very good long range boxer. He's very fit, right? Always works hard in the gym. If you look at the way that Dmitry Bivol trains, he does constant strength and conditioning, constant calisthenics. He's constantly hitting the bag in combinations and keeping a high work rate. He's doing all sorts of circuit training and he stays fit all year round. You can tell he's a guy who lives the life, right? And he's always ripped to the bone, always shows up in fantastic shape. And he's a guy who can work for 12 rounds. He can work hard. He can throw punches non-stop for an entire 12-round fight. But there's something about Dmitry Bivol to where he's not able to emulate what Beterbiev is able to do against the same opponents or against the same level of opponent. When Dmitry Bivol fights a top 10 or top 20 light heavyweight, he's not going in there and immediately stamping his authority on the fight and blasting these guys out or breaking them down, is he? No, what Dmitry Bivol likes to do, and this is why certain people have called him robotic, is because he needs to touch you with the jab. He needs to hide behind that high guard. he needs to hold the center of the ring, obviously, because he's got to establish dominance in the fight somehow. He can't just move around the ring and do nothing. He's not an Amero bum. He's a good, classy Russian fighter. So, he'll hold the center of the ring. He'll box. He'll establish his jab. He'll try and find a home for that right hand. He'll throw short, snappy combinations from mid-range. Like he'll throw a double jab, right hand jab. Like he'll dip to the side, left hand, right hand. He'll throw fluid combinations, and he's very, very accurate, and he's very, very consistent with how he boxes. He can box at that pace for 12 rounds. But like I said, he's not able to break these guys down, is he? The reason why these guys are going the distance, I mean, Canelo, he carried, in my opinion. But if you look at the other opponents he fought, like Gilberto Ramirez, you know how I feel about that fight. Let's not get into that. But, Lyndon Arthur definitely is a prime example of this. A guy who I don't think would have gone 4 rounds against Beterbiev, even running and spoiling the way he was against Bivol. I don't think he would have lasted 4 rounds. Craig Richards, a guy who kept the fight long range, did mess Bivol about with the jab, even though Bivol won the fight clearly, in my opinion. Craig Richards was able to catch him with the jab. Bivol had certain defensive lapses because he's so robotic and because he's so set in his ways with his classy, high guard, upright European style. It causes him to be so predictable to where these guys will just be like, okay, this guy might be beating me, but if I can just keep at long range, keep out the way of his jab, he's not going to jump on me and throw combinations because he needs to hit me with the jab first, or he needs to have me at a certain range first. So you're able to stay on the outside against Bivol, and you're not in any real danger. That was what Lyndon Arthur realized in that fight because he tried in some of the early rounds, but then when he realized he couldn't win, he just ran all night, stayed on the ropes, moved around when he needed to. And occasionally, all he would have to do is throw a jab or like a long right hand, and it would put Bivol straight back into his defensive construct. Bivol wasn't cutting off the ring, pivoting, coming in at angles, bending at the knees, bending at the waist, and ripping in hard body punches, pushing him back to the ropes, and spamming punches to his head inside. No, Bivol, I don't think he's even capable of doing that. Bevil's a guy who's so set in his ways that he has to have you at long range or at mid range, and he has to control you with his jab and his long right hand. He can't break you down. He's just not that kind of fighter. He's not Triple G. He's not Lomachenko. He's not Usyk. I don't think he's anywhere near as versatile as somebody like Usyk. Some people say that Bivol is a pound for pound level fighter. The only reason they say that is because he beat Canelo, who was considered a pound for pound fighter. But Canelo, for one, is an absolute fraud. And secondly, Canelo was half his size. I mean, Canelo had moved up 4 weight divisions prior to that fight. Had no power at light heavyweight, had no business at light heavyweight. Okay, Bivol should have stopped him early. And in addition to that, he was so bulked up and so jacked for that fight that Canelo had no stamina. And Bivol, all he had to do was step his foot on the gas, in my opinion. And he could have stopped him in 3 rounds, but, he just wasn't able to do it mentally. Like, he wasn't willing to go out there and stamp his authority on the fight. If that had been Beterbiev in there, does Canelo last 3 rounds? I don't think so, personally. So, you know, it makes me wonder, with Beterbiev's age, with him getting injured again, is that going to be enough for a fighter as limited as Dmitry Bivol to be able to do a number on him? Personally, at this point in time, I don't think so. Because, look, like I said, they've got similar attributes. They're both great boxers. They're both great. They both got great fundamentals. They're both European fighters. Came through that Russian amateur school. They both had a great amateur background. They both, you know, light heavyweight champions in the same era. They both got great defense. They both got great stamina, but Beterbiev is just so much more of a freak athletically. He can do things physically in the ring that Bivol just doesn't, in my opinion. He doesn't have the genetics to do. He was able to break down and stop Alexander Vosdik, who, in my opinion, is a lot more naturally athletic and naturally talented than Bivol is. Much bigger puncher than Bivol, and more proven at that stage of his career than Bivol was at that stage of his career when that happened. Because he beat, obviously, Adonis Stevenson, who was the lineal champion, past his prime, but still a fantastic win. and an impressive knockout, and one that a lot of people didn't expect. So I think Vosdik was definitely more talented from what I could see, and definitely a bigger puncher. But Beterbiev was, again, too physically strong, too much of a genetic freak, too skilled, too quick of feet, too quick of hand. And every punch he landed had an effect, and he ended up hospitalizing the guy. So, man, I just think if Bivol fights Beterbiev, he could find himself in a position in the very first round of that fight where he's in survival mode, in pure survival mode, something he's never been in before. Because Bivol has never, at any stage of his career, been under serious pressure. He's won every single fight with ease, pretty much, because his opponents, even when his opponents have given him problems from the outside, like Umar Salamov, Craig Richards, or Lyndon Arthur, when they've been able to land something on him and put him back behind his shell, these guys haven't taken the initiative and taken the fight to Bivol. He's never fought a world-class pressure fighter. He's never fought anybody with anywhere near the kind of punching power or physical strength of Beterbiev. So I honestly think it's not looking good for Bivol going into this fight. And if Bivol can improve certain things, if he can maybe get himself like some sparring partners that will apply a lot of pressure on him, and if he can learn to stand his ground and sit down on his punches a little bit more, then that gives him a better chance of winning. And if he can somehow employ lateral movement and keep Beterbiev turning, but hurt Beterbiev whenever he gets close, make him pay for cutting off the ring and trying to ragdoll him. That's the only way I see Bivol having a chance of winning, because I can't see him just outboxing Beterbiev. I can't see him winning in a shootout with Beterbiev. I think he needs to employ a very, very strategic approach to the fight where he fights in bursts but sits down on his punches and tries to do real damage with every punch he throws. So, yeah, that's how I see it, man. That's my breakdown. I think Beterbiev, if he's healthy, if he's replenished in his prime, if he's physically fit, I think he stops Bivol. And I think the only way Bivol wins is if he becomes more effective, aggressive, and learns how to stand his ground more. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say. Thanks for watching and God bless.